I just had an online date and I told him that I don't think we're compatible because I don't think I want children, and I'm getting increasingly sure of that, and he definitely does, because in our date the other day in person, we went to a pub and he was telling me that he definitely does want children, and he didn't really ask what I thought and what I was thinking. He had just assumed that I wanted them, even though that's not on my profile, and this was confirmed because he told me, yes, he just assumed that I did, and that's fine. I'm not offended by anything like that. I just wanted to let him know that, look, this is where I'm at with it, and I gave a bit more explanation, and I don't think we're that compatible for that reason and others. He's actually, he's ironically a vegan conservative. He used to be very, like, in activist circles and do like a lot of climate and animal and social justice activism. So he was really in it, and he's still a vegan. But he, and I'm not vegan, by the way, so we're really opposites in a lot of ways. Despite being an atheist and despite having always been kind of against religion, he's moving more and more towards religion, and we had a very deep conversation on our first date in person the other day about this, because he's very intellectual, and it was kind of a serious, like, well, it was funny at some points, but it was very deep. It was a very deep conversation about religion and politics and things, and it turns out that he finds the idea of Christianity appealing more so for the societal values in terms of the family, and has a lot of feelings about essentially women's rights. He had to tell me to look up Louise Perry, because he asked me, do you know of Louise Perry? And I said no, because I haven't listened to her work for a long time, but I'm aware of who she is. She calls herself a feminist. Her basic ideas are around returning to more typical gender norms, encouraging and incentivizing marriage in society through different means. And he also said this, he was like, oh, I think that marriage should have tax benefits, we should bring that back, and I'll get onto that in a moment. He was kind of criticising contraception, and he was saying that Louise Perry has a book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, and so I sort of knew these vague things about Louise Perry, but he had to remind me, but he seems to believe these things as well, and I'm just like, this is worrying. Now, I don't think the majority of men that I meet have this point of view, but an increasing number, because as we see in the US very clearly, there's the right-wing movement, whether that's MAGA or whether that's just conservative or whatever. You see men should be head of the household and lead and everything, and women should be submissive, and it's a lot of like religious language, because I feel like Christianity has a lot more influence in politics over there, whether they like to admit it or not. Whereas like here, obviously we're more secular in general, but he's a key example, and some other guys over the years that I've just been on dates with and had conversations with also have a similar, in fact, yes, I can definitely think of a few, definitely also have a similar take. And this guy, he doesn't actually believe in God. I'm spiritual, by the way, I'm very spiritual. I believe in like the universal consciousness, I have a lot of spiritual beliefs. So it's not that, like, believing in God, this monotheistic God, I don't think is necessarily like particularly spiritual one way or the other. I'm trying not to make a judgment on it, but the fact that he only likes Christianity and thinks it should be kind of more implemented and everything is quite telling, because it's like, oh, okay, so you like what it would provide for society, and you think about the family unit. He said so many things in this conversation that are very antithetical towards women's rights. For example, he was saying that he thinks that there should be taxes to incentivize people to stay married longer. He was saying, well, it encourages people to stay in long-term relationships, that's better for them. I said, is that better for them though? That's an assumption. Like that. What if it's abusive, or what if it's just unhealthy and they want to separate? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And he was like, but children have worse outcomes when they are not in a two-parent household. There's, with crime, with academic and professional achievements, etc. Maybe you're the culprit. Maybe the person holding that belief is the one actually perpetuating it, because if you're arguing for marriage to be tax incentives for people to stay in marriages, then necessarily when parents split up, they're going to be less economically well off, which they probably would be anyway, especially the mum, and the children are usually with the mum. even if they're with a dad, doesn't matter, but like a single parent household, single income is obviously harder, and they've got less benefits tax-wise. So of course the children have a worse outcome. So actually, instead of incentivizing marriage through giving tax benefits to married people, maybe we should make it easier for single parents, because that would improve it for the children. That would help children. Do you not want to help children? His answer was basically no, like, because you don't want to incentivize people to separate. And I was like, but people are going to stay together or they're going to separate. Like, that's their relationship. That's got nothing to do with the state. But we should just support people and the children in whatever dynamic happens to occur. And given it's harder, we should help single parents. Obviously, obviously, because this obviously speaks to just one little element of the great irony is plural, with the like right wing in America, which is like, oh yes, we care about the family, but we don't provide any help for even when parents are together, for maternity and paternity leave to be federalised, workers' rights and holidays and all of these other things. Free healthcare. Oh, you really care about the family, don't you? No, clearly not. This guy is also against, like, he's not against, but he was also sceptical of free healthcare. And I'm like, babe, it's not as though in all of these instances I can't see that there is another side. I am looking at the other side. But I think what he isn't considering is the woman and the children and what's actually best for people. So that's just one example. But he was also talking about contraception. And I literally said to him, sorry, but what are you proposing? Are you saying that we shouldn't have contraception? And he didn't come out and say it. He didn't really tell me, because he just moved on to Louise Perry. And I was like, well, what's her proposition? Is she saying that we shouldn't have contraception? And from what I can see, I just to refresh my memory, I looked at her podcast a little bit and I ChatGPT'd, what does Louise Perry say? What's her proposition? Doesn't seem like she has a clear proposition in terms of like birth control one way or the other, because I'll get onto that in a second, but I think that she does believe in like tax incentives for married people and everything. But are you kidding? Like, he was saying, oh yeah, because birth control is unhealthy for women and has all sorts of side effects. I was like, I'm well aware, like, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I have a degree in biology. Me and my friends, like a lot of my friends aren't on birth control because of the side effects and stuff. And I know people who've had bad side effects. Yes, it's an important conversation, absolutely. We should do more research. Perhaps we have a male contraceptive. But he was then talking about, well, it encourages women, he didn't say the word promiscuous, but he was essentially saying it encourages women to have all of these hookups and everything, and that's not good for them and it leads to bad outcomes and bad relationships. And I was like, well, that's their prerogative. That's women's prerogative. It's not like anyone's forcing them to do anything. But you, on the other side of that coin, the irony here is he is pro women and men staying together in a marriage. He's pro incentivizing marriage and people staying together for the sake of the children, right? Even though that doesn't make sense, as I just explained, because it's not, I didn't actually explain, but obviously abuse isn't good for children to witness. Toxic dynamics are not good for children to witness, nor is, unhappy people. It's very much better. And I know this from, some acquaintances, and one of my uncles got divorced recently, and he has a, harmonious relationship with his ex, and the children are perfectly fine because they get on and because they're both independent, happy people. Like, it affects them a lot less than, I don't think that they had a particularly acrimonious relationship anyway. I think, they're still on good terms. But if it, in the worst case scenarios, when this is acrimonious, when this is abusive, obviously, there's also such little ways to prove that. It's not like a couple should have to, or a woman or a man should have to go into court to prove that it's abusive, because how are you supposed to collect evidence for those kind of, you have to allow no-fault divorce, of course. What is so archaic to think otherwise, and it's not good for children. And that. Anyone with a brain knows that. People need to have autonomy and agency. When it's restricted, especially for a class or a group of people like women, that's when really bad outcomes occur. Basically, his argument is, women are super promiscuous, it's bad for them, people would be happier for more long-term relationships. Yet he wants people to be forced to stay together. And it's like, but intermarital rape is a massive issue, especially in religious like Christianity or Islam, like there's a lot of conversation about purity and remaining pure and maybe even a virgin, or at least being modest. This is still like, especially on the right, conservative, in the UK, in the US, everywhere, it's more encouraged to be modest, and it's like there's these elements of purity and don't be a slut, don't be a slag, basically. But as soon as you're married, give it to your husband whenever he wants. Oh, to keep your husband happy. Even if you're tired, women need to endure things, and like there's so much language around women just rolling over even though they're exhausted and letting their man fuck them, like even though they don't want to, because that keeps them happy. So women are expected to be pure and then be a slut in the marriage, like instead of, and apparently that's good. Apparently, according to this guy, I mean, we didn't really discuss intermarital stuff, but I'm assuming he's more pro that, as though that isn't abuse, as though that isn't rape, because it's one man and you're under the, omnipotent presence of God or something. Whereas it's like, actually, isn't it far more healthy that women have choice? They can sleep with whoever they want to, as many or as few people as they want to, and they can get married. They don't have to get married. It's not not coerced to. It's not like there's a huge difference financially if they do or if they don't. They don't have to have children. They can or they don't have to. And if they marry, they can divorce. They're not like, obviously this is better. And he even spoke about like, but a lot of animals, like if you look at the animal kingdom, males have a different mating strategy to females. Like I have a degree in biology who's explaining all of this to me as though I've never heard it before. And it's like, yeah, obviously, yeah. Yeah, and I know that this has consequences for our psychology and our biology. Duh, of course it does. But whilst we are absolutely animals, we are animals. We are in the animal kingdom, no doubt about that. But we also clearly have a civilization. We clearly have this consciousness that, evolution hasn't really been able to explain. And I'm not saying that comes from some guy in the sky at all. But my point is we have a little bit of a developmental difference in intellectually. And so his point was, it's not good for women to be promiscuous. And so it's like, but no one's making us. Like, no one's making women be promiscuous. If a woman wants to sleep around, she can, because we're not purely animals. Like, and we do have contraception. And who is it hurting? Who is it hurting? And I have heard all the arguments, from Louise Perry and from this guy and from others over the years about like, but it's so bad because, casual relationships are not fulfilling. And, I used to kind of buy into a lot of this a bit more and like, it's not good, they're not fulfilling. And like STDs, obviously, to be honest, my main hesitation with all of this is, oh my God, I don't want to catch anything. So that's why I'm very like cautious. But most people make the arguments about like, because people aren't settling down and it's bad for, people aren't meeting someone and they're getting married later and they're not having enough children. And they make it into like this family thing and the family unit isn't being formed and it's so bad for people. And it's like, it's so bad that women have choice. It's so bad that, there's contraception. It's so bad that women have autonomy. And he was even saying, he literally said, because this is a very calm, friendly conversation, by the way. I'm getting a bit mad now, but I wasn't. I was really trying to just listen to him and hear where he was coming from. But he literally said, yeah, but I feel like autonomy isn't the main thing that's important. And I sort of interrupted him. I was like, sorry, what is? He said there's a value more important than autonomy. I was like, sorry, what is more important than autonomy? What do you mean? Like, I'm just curious. Like I wonder what it is. Like, I'm just wanting to know what is more important than autonomy. And he, like, women's autonomy in this instance. And he was like, children. And and he was saying, because you seem to be, he was talking about me saying, I seem to be coming from a perspective of just caring about women. And I said, okay, first of all, this word autonomy is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's a very important thing because this isn't only, like, this is so many things. This is women's reproductive control. This is women's rights, being able to get out of abusive relationships, and also not only on an individual level would lack of contraception and people not having no fault marriages and things affect the individual woman on a mass scale, but it would affect the domain to which women occupy in society itself. Like we would be going back to like the 1920s. I was saying to him, my dad's one of 7, but my granny was one of 12. My granddad was one of 19. And he was like, oh, it's impressive. And I said, is it? Because I can't, like, I was like, it's horrific. It's horrific because I'm pretty sure my great-grandma did not want to have 19 kids. And I said, I'm pretty sure, like I calculated it in the past, and she was pregnant for 13 and a half years of her life in that state. And you think that's impressive? Like, and he didn't seem to get it. And again, this conversation was very calm and friendly, but I was like, that's not okay. Like, do you think that she had a choice in the matter? Do you think she actually had a choice? And even if she did, that would be unlikely. And so many women didn't. Like, of course she didn't have a choice. Of course she didn't want to have 19 children. Of course she didn't want to. Not only for her own health, but also because, what the fuck? There's so many mouths to feed, you know. I personally care about the quality of human life, not the quantity of it. And I think women, generally, we do tend to be a little bit more hesitant about having children than men, or at least the ideal family size when surveyed that men prefer is about 1 to 2 children, whereas women is 0 to 1, usually. Obviously, that's just on some surveys in the UK, I've read that. But it's because, of course, not only do we have to actually grow them, birth them, raise them, but I think it's also, it's not just coming from that point of view, which he might say is selfish, where it's like, what? No, it's not. Do you think if you don't sacrifice your life, you're selfish? But it's also coming from the point of view of actually being able to not only provide for that child, but is it ethical to bring a child into the world? What are the opportunities? You know, can you feed them? Can you provide for them? All of these other things, is it even ethical? Is there going to be more suffering than fulfillment, or more fulfillment than suffering? More likely. Like, there's so many things that we consider, and I'm not speaking about men and women generally, because I know that there are many men that are also think this way and also, aren't wanting to go back to these archaic values. But it is concerning. It is concerning to go on a date with someone who believes this. Because he seems like a really nice guy in a lot of ways, so I'm not trying to assume the worst about him. But just what he was saying was, I was thinking like, oh my God. He was also talking about like women's careers and how like, a lot of women when they hit 30, if they're lawyer women, leaving their profession at 30 and wanting families. And I'm thinking, well, or they just scale back. You know, they still use their profession, but it's not like they just decide that, he was saying, family is the most meaningful thing. And I'm thinking, like, I'm not anti-natal and I'm not anti-family, by the way, just to be clear. I am pro-choice and I am pro-autonomy. These opinions of birth control being a bad thing and perhaps we shouldn't have it, of people should be incentivized to be married and stay in marriages, women should have children earlier, this is also what he was saying, women should have children earlier and prioritise that over a career. Women being promiscuous is such a bad thing and women's autonomy isn't that important. Like, these are very dangerous ideas, but they're not becoming less common. I think that they're becoming more common, especially in certain areas of the internet and obviously in real life, because this is a real life man that I met, and I met other people with these, people on the internet are real life people usually, unless they're a bot. But it's not like they are inconsequential. I think that the birth rate crisis narrative, the idea that, the birth rate's collapsing and it's so terrible, yes, it will have economic consequences. It was always going to, because a whole global economic system built on this concept of growth was never going to work indefinitely. Of course, it's going to have economic impacts, but actually it's not a bad thing. People are making choices to have less children, and a lot of the time, yes, people want to have more children and they're choosing not to because they can't afford it, and that's sad, but it is better than, because we're a population and all animals on a rock with limited resources, it is better that we choose to have less children rather than it being imposed on us, or the numbers of us dwindling or being drastically reduced in some other way. Starvation, war, etc. Like euthanasia, it could be worse. The population does have to decline. It is necessary and it is inevitable. And it's happening, and it's not a bad thing. But it might be bad for the economy, but that's because, politics and economics and etc. isn't working on a long-term projections, really. Because of this narrative of it being a bad thing, we need more people. Look around, we are overpopulated, babe. We are overpopulated, but apparently we need more people. It's not like we have a fragile food system, is it? It's not like we have so many people and the cost of housing and the water and everything. Like, it's not like there's so many environmental issues. It's not like there's resource problems with gas and oil. It's not like there's energy issues. It's not like that, things are so fragile. It's not like if an EMP went off, we wouldn't all be effed. Anyway, I think a lot of this, and I've got no idea how this works in practice, but I'm sure that there is some element of truth to this, or at least there certainly was in the past. A lot of these ideologies are for population control. You don't want idle men. Like, I've never heard anyone talk about this, so I would like to hear people's feedback on this idea. But I feel like a future with AI making jobs redundant, right? So fewer jobs, that can't be like the same reason the 3-day, 4-day work week can't be. There's a link between AI and anti-feminism, because if there's fewer jobs, then there's a lot of idle people. That's bad, because half of those people are going to be men. And you don't want idle men. You do not want idle men, because the men are the ones that riot. Sure, women can riot, but the men are the ones that are really smashing stuff up. The men are the people storming the gates, usually with the pitchforks. Amongst them will be some women, but it's the men that are the army, right? And so, if, however, there are fewer jobs due to AI, but the idle people are only women, and the men are all satisfied, the men are not idle, the men are satisfied, there won't be anarchy. How do you keep the men satisfied? You keep them employed and busy and providing for a large family. Give them a woman. You make sure that each of them has a woman so that they're satisfied. And so reducing women's rights in a future where there's fewer jobs actually leads to less anarchy and easier population to control. But the reality is that we are overpopulated. And so if you want to control the population on a numbers level, it tends to be the Conservatives that aren't worried about that, though, for some reason. They're like, let's have lots of children, but eventually they'll have to face the fact that there's too many people, but they don't seem to be worried about that. AI, fewer jobs. Oh no, we can't have idle men. Okay, let's make sure the women aren't working. Let's make sure the men are satisfied because they all have someone pretty to fuck. How do we, and they all are forced to provide for lots of children. If we remove contraceptives, if we make people have to marry and incentivize that economically, or through policies like not having no-fault divorce and things like that, just taking away contraception, and by changing those marital policies and having a difficult economic situation would create that same 1950s dynamic, that same 1920s dynamic, wherever, it would create the same conditions. And it's just by taking away, banning contraception and things. And that's really scary. And the idea that, like this guy was saying, that women's autonomy is not that important. And, it cares more about the children. You don't care about children though, do you? Because you just want lots of them, but you don't care about the quality of life. And it's not good for children to be in abusive situations, to be with, a patriarchal man and or witnessing abuse amongst the parents. It is healthier for children to grow up in single parent households where they are not, where they are happy and independent and actually helped by the state. Oh no, but we don't want to incentivize people to split up. It's not about the people, it's about the children. It's about the children, because people should have autonomy and agency and not be forced to stay in relationships with people that they don't want to be with or that are abusive. Okay, it's really not that complicated. It's really not, but I think he's speaking a lot from, this guy I went on a date with, I think he's speaking a lot from his perspective about, he just is sort of annoyed by the state of dating and annoyed that, a lot of women don't want children. It's just like, he wants to have children, he's conservative, he's also a vegan, it's a bit strange. Yeah, anyway, I think a lot of that has to do with population control. When we think about anti-feminism, it avoids anarchy. It's not that it's like the natural domain of women and natural domain of men to be in the house having lots of children and out providing, you know, respectively. Let's not just look at 1950s as though that's traditional. What are you talking about? Go back 2,000 years before Christianity came along. I've done quite a lot of research into like local history and things, and there were pagan tribes. There were loads of pagan tribes. Do you know who was a cool figure? I don't know how to pronounce her name. I always get it wrong. Queen Boadicea. Queen Boadicea. Queen Boadicea was a warrior, a pagan warrior, a Celtic pagan warrior. These pagan tribes, who we are descended from, right? Well, at least, you know, in the British Isles, but it's probably the same in most parts of the world, right? Before mass religion, mass organised monotheistic religion, a lot of the world was pagan, meaning lots of different religions with lots of different gods. Because, you know, they didn't have science, they didn't have access to science, and so they had a god for the river, they had a god for the harvest, they had a god for the rain, they had a god for all sorts of different things, for fertility. You know, they had a god for all sorts of different things. And understanding that, and understanding how those people lived, and how obviously there would have been some different gender dynamics which varied between tribe, which varied between pagan religion. But there was not one overarching like gender norm. There wasn't, other than what is in material reality. Because yes, men and women are different, and I would never deny that. I have a degree in biology, right? Which focused on endocrinology. It focused on hormones. And it's very much true that men have a different physiology and different, you know, from bone density to the angles of the arm, and like, there's a lot of differences. But that doesn't mean that women weren't also hunting and foraging, that women were, I mean, obviously spending a lot of time pregnant. Probably, maybe they had, you know, the thing is, there was a lot more indigenous knowledge and a lot more knowledge about plants and the properties that they had. So perhaps that they would have actually had some kind of access to some kind of contraception or some kind of thing that you take to avoid getting pregnant. Whereas that knowledge was lost when the churches came in, and, you know, everything that wasn't Christianity was witchcraft. But I say all this to say, it's not like that is traditional. Christianity is traditional. If you want to talk real tradition, if you want to talk about our ancestors, you're talking about paganism, and you're talking about people that had an indigenous connection to nature and didn't just want to subdue it over all the living things in the sky and the sea and the ground, like Genesis 1:28 says in the Bible. They didn't just want to subdue it and have dominion over it. They actually saw the divinity in it, and they actually honoured it and understood the values and had a lot more knowledge about what these different plants and things actually did, and had an interconnectedness of nature, and things like phytosociology, where like certain plants grow together, and just knowledge that we just don't have now unless you study horticulture, which is something I'm actually about to do. So if you want to talk tradition, talk paganism, talk polytheism, in terms of wanting to understand the real natural norms and dynamics between men and women. Now, I actually don't know much about paganism, and actually it's difficult in terms of the written record, because this was thousands of years ago, or at least over like 1,500 years ago, you know, where there was still like tribes. When the Romans were here, there was still some of the tribes, and some of them had good relations and with the Roman Empire and the Vikings, etc., and others didn't, like Queen Boadicea, and a female warrior, you know, that she ended up taking back from the Romans, defeating the Romans in St Albans, in I think London area, and somewhere in the Midlands. So she was successful, and she led that army. So if you want to know about the real domains of men and women, it's not the kitchen for women, and it's not, you know, out getting the bacon for men. It's not as simple as that. So yeah, these conversations really do worry me. And I'm glad I had this conversation with him, and I learned what he believes about these things. Because the thing is, I'm 28 now, but a few years ago, I wouldn't, you know, when I was just more naive, I was more disorientated, I was more confused, and I would have maybe gone on a date with someone like this and sort of agreed with them about a lot more, or just like taken what they said as fact and perhaps even liked some of the things that he was saying. But I feel like I'm just a lot more educated now, and it does concern me, the conviction to which he was saying a lot of this stuff. He does seem to be a thoughtful person, but you know, there are a lot of people that say this stuff with a lot of conviction, and we're talking about women's rights, we're talking about children, we're talking about it's not just a conversation. These conversations lead to pregnancies. These conversations lead to marriages with or without abuse. It's not light-hearted. This is an important issue, obviously. So anyway, I hope this has been interesting.